So one of the things that's happened over the last 10 or 15 years is that the relative technological depth of the consumer compared to the clinician has moved in favor of the consumer, because the consumer has suddenly had access to some fraction of the world's information through a smartphone. And one of the things that I observed was that, and I think we know this from anecdote, and you talk about it a little bit in your writings, is that it constructs a challenge in the authority of the doctor, and that doctors have had to learn new ways of talking to their patients. Is the future extending that relationship, or is it more a return to the past of the authoritative, all-knowing doctor and the comparatively ignorant patient?
No, Azim, I think you nailed that. We're moving towards democratization. That is, this level playing field where not only should all patients, all citizens have their data. I ideally think they should own their data. But beyond that, they're generating their data. So more and more, the sensors that people might wear for specific conditions, either to help manage them or prevent them, they'll be generating and getting feedback from their data through algorithms. We've already seen the beginning of that with heart rhythm through a smartwatch and glucose sensors and so many more that are in the pipeline. So we have a whole new configuration whereby their data is flowing from different paths. And at the same time, as you alluded to, there's an unwillingness of doctors in general to let go, to cede the authority, to understand and accept that medical paternalism is history. We aren't there yet. It's a slow-moving change, but it's inevitable. Once medical data became digitized and eminently portable and being generated by people in their own real world rather than the contrived setting of a doctor's office or a hospital, that really kind of upended the whole setting that we kind of lived in for thousands of years.
So let's talk about some of those technologies then. In your book, you chronicle a lot of them, and I've been following this area for a few years, and I think about, continuous glucose monitoring and, yes, you're right, heart rate tracking on the smartwatch, the machine vision on retinal scans that can look at the vascularity and predict the sex of the owner of the eyeball. There's so many exciting things going on. Can you pull out one of your favorites?
Well, you've touched on a few good ones there, Azim. I think the one that is so striking is the retina that you alluded to, and the fact that the international retina experts, if we give them a picture of the retina and ask them, is that from a man or a woman, they get the answer correct 50% of the time.
So as good as flipping a coin.
Yeah. But if we use a deep learning algorithm, the accuracy is already over 97%. And no one knows why, because, the algorithm is trained from hundreds of thousands of images with ground truths. And it just basically shows the power. I mean, we can tell male versus female without having to do this, of course. But right. it just is such a statement about, if you train a machine to see things that humans can't, just like, for example, that you could have a smartwatch and it analyzes your cardiogram through your wrist and gives you your blood potassium level through your watch without any blood, or that you have the gastroenterologist that misses small diminutive polyps frequently. But now all of a sudden, the machine vision with deep learning is trained not to miss any polyps. And the list of these things that machines see when they're trained that humans can't is one of the most striking aspects of the field of AI in healthcare.
There's obviously some higher order structure, but it takes us to this slightly problematic scenario. A patient, we'll call him Bob, is feeling some condition, goes to his local hospital, has his data read, put through some deep learning algorithm, and it spits out the answer, we need to cut out this bit of Bob's body. And no trained expert clinician has been able to come to that conclusion. But the algorithm has always been right before, and it can't explain why it should do that. Now, I've injected a bit of hyperbole in that example, but I mean, I think the question here is, with all of this magic, and we can see empirically that these relationships have existed previously, but we've generally required a chain of reasoning, even with our chemical pharmaceuticals, haven't we?
Absolutely. But there's a few things there that are noteworthy. Firstly, that although we don't acknowledge adequately that there are black box algorithms of medical care today through human provision, there are plenty. We have no idea how anesthetics work or many other medications. We have no idea how electroconvulsive therapy can be so effective for very severe depression. There's a long list of things that have unexplainability in practice today. So this is a serious question, is, how much are we going to hold algorithms accountable to be transparent and explainable before they could be put in use?
If those were new innovations coming to the market today, do you think they'd get regulatory approval?
I think the standard for approval is without regard to knowing the mechanism. And that's if you have data from 2 trials, randomized trials ideally, and you show there's unequivocal benefit and acceptable side effect profile, it will be approved. And we have, another great example, metformin is the number 1 go-to drug for type 2 diabetes. And only recently did we learn how it works through the gut microbiome, which is astounding. So we have gone, for hundreds of years using drugs and interventions that we had no clue. It didn't ever require a regulatory mechanistic proof. It was just show us that it works. And so we seem to be holding algorithms accountable in a different way. I'm somewhat neutral about this. I would like to see everything explainable.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think we also have to be sanguine about the way in which these technologies develop. If you've ever worked with software developers, they love writing code and hate writing documentation that explains their code. And it's no surprise. We're 7 years from when deep learning burst on the scene for speech recognition and image recognition, that people would get excited by its capabilities and explore those capabilities much more than they would thinking about questions like, how do we make this explainable? And I'm pretty optimistic that we're making quite good progress in contending with the black box nature, whether it is techniques like Lime or Shapley curves to figure out what are the components that are driving the output of an algorithm, through to better understanding of how we try to contextualize the output of an algorithm in its real world environment. And it's unsurprising that we're getting to this after we've made the breakthrough. That's just the order of things.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. So I think we'll see steady progress in this, because when GDPR was brought about last May throughout Europe, it made a demand for explainability. So there's going to be a drive towards that. And it is, as you say, it's not what software engineers enjoy doing, but there is a movement within the AI community to do a much better job of understanding this kind of mystery that makes algorithms work so well in healthcare. But the other point is a really important to underscore, which is the human context. And that's where clinicians come into play, because if it's anything serious, like something that would require surgery in the scenario you just presented, that's where you have oversight. You have the judgment and the context of all the things besides what an algorithm spit out. So that's why I think there's an exciting potential future here, because yes, you can have algorithms see things that humans can and process immense data sets that a human can't, but then you have the extraordinary experience, the wisdom, the judgment, and the context that no machine's ever going to have.
No machine's going to have it, but for one reason, we can't codify it because it's in the other black box, the super deep neural network that lives in our heads. And I think it's one of the things I've noticed with the very best clinicians who I've dealt with is just the number of variables they are able to juggle and intuit when they take your history and look at you and talk to you and ask you seemingly unrelated questions. We haven't written that down. That is established, I guess, in the field of your training, of your decades of training as you become a senior clinician.
Yes, exactly. I like your use of the deep neural network in the master clinicians. I'm hoping that we'll have a lot more master clinicians when we have machine augmentation. We need the reflective thinking or the equivalent of that from processing the data and raising possibilities of the diagnoses that don't come instantly to the mind of experienced clinicians.